Okay, so this is a training on some tips around when you're certifying a CD or when you're reviewing final numbers when you're trying to resubmit for CTC. Sometimes the property taxes gets a little bit screwy. And so this will be a training on how to avoid this. Like if you ever run into an issue where you're doing your Tuesday update and like the customer's like, hey, the CD looks all wrong. If you're trying to resubmit for CTC and all of a sudden your cash to close gets all screwed up and your Encompass won't run right after, because sometimes like I don't know, Grace or Tequila, if you've ever seen this where like you certify the CD goes out, and then all of a sudden the next day you go look at your file and it's all screwed up. Has that happened to y'all?
That happened to me yesterday.
Right. Okay. And then you're like, what the heck happened? Right. So this will be kind of a training to give you some different tips on, oh, sorry, I don't know why my video wasn't sharing, but some tips on like how to potentially fix that. Okay. So let's jump into a couple resources first. So number one, right here, this is an email. I sent this to Broadger. She's going to put the notes in there. This is specifically around when you're dealing with property taxes in the months of October, November, and December. Okay. That because the way property taxes work is when you've got a CD. Let's see if I can find it. I can find a CD real quick. Okay, here we go. This is actually a pretty, okay. So what happens here, do you see how the property taxes are being paid for the entire year over here? Okay. And then we're just collecting for the new inbound account. So it's like 3 and 2. So that's pretty common, is we're going to be around 3 to 3 months usually. But then what happens is, and that's because we're closing this loan in January. But let's say we closed in October. Usually let's say we close in September, because it's usually September's the 9th month of the year. You usually also will collect 3 months for the impound. So what ends up happening is there's like 12 months collected here. Okay. And then you'll usually get a credit from the seller down here. So what happens is basically we're setting up the impound account so that the buyer can pay the tax bill in December. And they're going to get a credit because they bought this home. Let's assume in this example, they bought the home in September. They're closing September 1st. Okay. So what's going to happen is the seller is going to issue a credit, and it's going to say county taxes, and it'll say from January 1st to September 1st, whatever the close date is. Okay. So that way the seller will credit the buyer for the amount of taxes they owe for the year, but we will be setting up the impound account for 12 months here, because we need to collect for 9 months plus 3 months, because usually that's kind of how the calculation works. And then there's this aggregate adjustment that kind of offsets it a little bit, because the net effect is usually about 3 months. And the reason for that is, let's say we're closing September 1st. Their first payment would not be, does anybody know when their first payment is? If you close in the month of September, when is your first payment? Grace or Tequila, do you know that? You are on mute, Tequila.
If they close in September, their first payment is going to be, I told them November. It's going to be November.
November.
I said November. You didn't read my lips.
That's right. Yeah. So your first payment is always the first month following your close month. So if you close anytime in January 1st or January 30th, first payment is March. So if any customer ever asks you that, okay. So the reason that we collect 3 months is if they're closing September 1st, their first payment is not till November. So we need to collect their portion of the taxes for the month of September, because they're living there in September. October, they're living there in October, but they're not making payments in September, October, plus what's called an escrow cushion. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, all those people require some kind of escrow cushion. All right. So for what it's worth. So what I would say is, coming back to this email from Lisa, is you've got a couple different options on how property taxes are handled. The standard way would be is how I just described it. That is how it's going to be most of the year, is that we collect whatever month they're closing plus 2 to 3 months in the impound account, and they get credited from the seller on page 3 of the closing disclosure, which is what I just showed you. That is the standard. But let's say they're closing in November and the property tax bill is out. Well, in that scenario, the seller will pay the entire tax bill. So it'll look actually a little bit like this, in the fact that let's say this was, where's the seller? Yeah, seller paid at closing. So in this case, it'll look like this. The seller will pay the entire tax bill, okay, right here. then they'll just set up just the standard impound account 3 months. And then down here, it'll show here that the buyer is responsible to pay the tax bill for the entire, is basically going to credit the seller. This is yeah, this is actually kind of how it works. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, it worked that way. Is in this scenario, the seller is paying the tax bill up here, but then the buyer is going to credit the seller for the portion of the year in which they live in it. So, which is kind of interesting on this particular one. But I would say read this email from Lisa. Broderick will save it, so that all you really need to do is, if you run into a situation where the numbers look a little bit off, come back to this training, get with Broderick, get with Lisa, look at this email, and then and determine, that if it's like November of next year, that's when sometimes it gets a little bit wonky. Okay, so just save this training for future reference. Now let's go through the other scenarios where sometimes this gets screwed up. So like if all of a sudden your cash to close is off, what is the reason? What I would say is one of the most common reasons, okay, that the closing disclosure will look wrong is that is number one is like, did the homeowner's insurance go up? Okay, so like, for example, on this client, they chose a much more expensive homeowner's insurance policy. So what happened was I quoted them a cash to close of $27, which this was a VA loan and the seller was paying all the closing costs. So that's why that was that way. And a payment of $16.94. We got to the preliminary closing disclosure and the payment went up like $80. Okay. And the cash to close went up $4,000. So all of a sudden it's like she didn't qualify anymore. Okay. They don't have $4,000. Okay. So what I said to the client, because I think this actually was one of your deals, Tequila, is you all of a sudden we resubmitted for CTC and boom, the loan didn't get approved anymore. So I explained, hey, you chose a super expensive homeowner's insurance policy, pick a different policy, pick a cheaper policy. The other reason is that the over 65 exemption. Okay. So what I would say that would be a good training opportunity, especially maybe if we had Danielle start helping out with CDs to double check stuff, is when you get the tax certificate, see if there is an over 65 exemption. If there's an over 65 exemption, what's going to happen is there's going to be a disconnect where all of a sudden the buyer is going to be putting in a lot more money into their escrow account. They're going to be putting money, like, let's say, for example, at a $746 a month rate. They put it in here on this line. But then if you go down here and let's say this is on a sale of a home, the county taxes, the credit from the seller, in this particular case, if we go back, I think they, yeah, here we go. This gives it, and I'll share this email with Broderick so you can put it in the training, is the seller tax proration listed on page 3 of this document was 1,051. So for example, we're looking at a CD, this line item was 1,051. Okay. This was based on the 2020 property taxes, but we were in 2021 when we were closing it, and we were in September of 2021. So what happens is basically they were only collecting $116 per month, 1,051 divided by 9. But but the actual taxes should have been $221 a month. Okay, that is what it should be based on the actual tax bill. But the title company was like, well, hey, the actual tax bill won't be out till October, so we're going to use the 2020 tax cert. Well, that causes all kinds of problems. So what we need to do, and Tequila, I think you're familiar with this, right? Like you've logged into the Dcad website and done a tax estimator. So what you do is you go to this website, and this would be a good thing to save. Is you look up the property taxes here. I would also recommend saving this website, Dcad tax rate calculator, okay? Because then you can type in the stuff from the tax certificate, but then we can use the 2022 tax rate, okay? So that way we can send this over to the title company and the underwriter, and they can update it. Because otherwise what's going to happen is the buyer is going to be putting in the property taxes at the 2021 rate, the seller's putting in at the 2020 rate, and there's a shortage. So that is like what was happening in this particular case with Dennis, was the seller tax proration was off by about $900, $1,000, which in this case, this customer, that $1,000 was the difference between getting an approved loan or not, right? Like they only had, if we got it down to 2,100, which was that still worked. We could get the loan work. They only had about, I think, $3,000 in their mint. So I'm going to save this, but this gives you an example of things to look for with if it looks off, the cash to close looks off when you're certifying the CD. It could be due to homeowners insurance. It could be due to seller tax prorations. And so the dentist file is a good one to kind of look at, and I'll save this email. Another example, property taxes, I think, was the okay, good. Here, the seller's paying the tax bill. So like the Matthews file, okay, Rachel and Roy Matthews, this is kind of going back to what I was talking about. This was like, I think, a November closing, and the CD got all screwed up because when we sent out the initial CD, oh, will it not open up? Oh shoot, I saved this email. I don't know why it won't open up. Well,
Click on the side and see if that allow you the little arrow button. Jack.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right there. Yeah, preview.
It's so weird, isn't it?
It allowed us to preview it. Oh, nope. I don't know why.
Okay, well, so what happened was, look here. So the initial quote I quote him was 196. The preliminary closing disclosure went at 198. Okay. But what happened was the way the seller taxes were being, like, the seller was supposed to pay it and then the buyer was supposed to credit them. But that stuff got a little wonky and it wasn't communicated well. So it threw the cash to close up by, about, I think, $2,500. Once we got that fixed, everything was great. So if you're doing a Tuesday update and all of a sudden the customer's like, after the CD goes out and they start panicking on you, this gives you some tools and resources on how to handle that situation. Does that make sense? So let's take a look here. Anything? Oh, here's another example, is the Patrick Berrigan file. So what happened is, if you can, going to the Dcad is the best place to go, like we did on the dentist file, right? But on the Patrick and American Berrigan file, what happened was, it was the same thing. The seller's tax prorations were wrong. Okay. But this was in Ellis County. Well, Ellis County does not have a tax estimator tool on its website. So we had to do a more detailed breakdown. Okay. Also, what I wanted you to do was see that in the contract, it lists right here per the okay, a standard Texas contract, the seller is responsible for their property taxes of the year they're closing. So in this scenario is very similar, where what happened was the buyer was paying the seller tax prorations for 2021, but the seller was paying the tax prorations based on 2020. So there was this disconnect. So the buyer was getting shorted about $651. Okay. Now what happens is, eventually it would get sorted out. Like this customer, I think, was closing in September. Okay. Well, when the tax bill comes out, the buyer can go back to the seller and say, hey, you owe me that money per the contract. It says taxes for the current year will be prorated, not the prior year. But title companies, if they don't have a document to work with, like if there is no tax estimator, they use the tax certificate. And the tax certificate for most of the year is the prior year. Like the tax certificate doesn't come out till like October. So these are situations where if you notice this, you will want to either handle it yourself or bring it to my attention, like when you're certifying that CD, as a way to kind of avoid hitting a last minute glitch where the final CD screwed up, or you're trying to get your clear to close gets screwed up. So with Ellis County, I had to do a little bit more digging. Let's see here. Does it allow me to open it? Here we go. Yeah. So I had to do like a property tax search, and then I had to track down the taxable value. So you can do a property search. And then I was able to see that. And I said, hey, based upon a date of August 10th, look, this is where it's at. Let's use that figure. Okay. So I'm going to share these examples with Broad so she can put them in the training material. We're going to save this video. But this gives you some context on when you're certifying a CD, when you're resubmitting. Like, so Tequila, on your particular one yesterday, does this help, or were there other issues on the one you ran into yesterday where the cash to close got screwed up after you certified the CD?
The only reason why it wasn't really the cash to close, it was the MI, the approval, the underwriter specialist, the underwriter support had done screwed everything up. So we had to try to get that corrected.
Got it. Okay. So within, I think, was that was the Skylar Durkin file, right? Okay. So what I would say is that is a great example of, especially since Danielle's a little bit newer, is what I would say is, so we do a lot, Danielle, a lot of single premium, okay, which is a different type of private mortgage insurance than monthly. Okay, so the monthly mortgage insurance is the most common way to do it. But if someone has a good credit score over 720, there is a cool program called single premium, which and a lot of times is a better deal for EMI. Where it is. And this is the training website of different videos I've done. Where the heck is my PMI training? Well, maybe I need to do a new one. I can't remember if that was the one.
We did do a PMI training though, Jax. We did.
We did. I think what happened was on that one, it had borrower social security numbers and the training,
and we couldn't save it.
They made me delete it. Dang it. Okay, so I needed to do a new one because what happens is I saved that training and I gave it to all the underwriters because a lot of times they would mess it up. Because here's the thing I want you to know. So when we price single premium, do we do it on the base LTV or the CLTV? Tequila, do you know?
The base.
So for example, if I have a 90% LTV, that is the base LTV. But if I'm doing single premium, it means I'm financing the charge for the private mortgage insurance, let's say that's $2,000. The loan amount goes up by $2,000. My LTV is now like closer to 91%. Well, what is the MI coverage at 91%? Danielle or Grace, do you know what that is?
It's 25.
Share my screen. So this is a good resource to save, right? Is if we're doing standard, right? So this is
yeah, that's over 20 years.
Is greater than 20 years. So if you're putting 3% down, it's 35%. Well, if you're in this range right here, so Tequila was absolutely correct, 25%. Okay. So what ended up happening though is the base LTV is 90%. So we should be charging PMI at 12%.
Oh.
Okay. But what happens is when the underwriter goes in, if they don't understand this, they're going to see, oh, the CLTV, the total loan to value is like 91% because we financed the MI. And then they try to charge you 25%, which screws up the PMI certificate. But you have to explain to them, no. PMI is priced on the base LTV, Mr. Underwriter, not the total LTV. Some underwriters know that, other underwriters do not understand it. So on Skylar Van Durken, Tequila, what I'm guessing is we put the PMI quote in the file at 6% because he's doing 15% down plus single premium.
No, Jack, they screwed it all the way up. They went to monthly. All the lock, my notes, everything was financing everything in, and then they still put monthly. The underwriter support changed to monthly. Laura was like, "What in the heck?"
Right. So the fact is, Danielle and Grace, is Tequila kind of understands this stuff better, right? The more experienced you are as a processor, the more valuable you are at problem solving, right? So to me, like first thing first is let's just get it good at processing and hitting your metrics, right? Then you've got to learn how to be a good problem solver and how to proactively interact with an underwriter just because an underwriter tells you something may or may not mean they know what they're talking about. We always want to be really good at the guidelines. I want you to be able to read Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA, where you track this stuff down. Over time, we'll do more trainings like this so you just develop your skill set. But yeah, I think this is good for now. I'll forward this stuff over to Broadra. She'll organize it. And then this way, when you run into a situation where the CD doesn't look right, maybe these examples help and you can use them. If not, come to me and I'll help you problem solve. And you'll just kind of learn over time how to address those issues. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. I'll get this posted to the YouTube page. Y'all have a great day. All right.
You too. All right, Jax. Have a good one.
Bye.